Congratulations! You made it to the Unheard Edition of the Exfil. You can sit back and relax, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hey there, Mike, aka MTBtrigger here, and with me as always is my co-host Ronal, aka Eric. If you're brand new, welcome. This is an Escape from Tarkov podcast where we talk about all things EFT, and our goal is to get better at the game, and we hope you come along with us for that journey.
This week we're diving into PvE, our thoughts on where and why BSG did this, the rollout and how it really went, and our experience with it so far. But first, Trigger, how have things been going for you?
It's been good, man. Life's been a little bit crazy, as I'm sure the lack of episodes after our quick start to the wipe would suggest, but overall good. Speaking of the wipe, we played a lot at the beginning of the wipe on the PvP side, and it's funny, we did those Ground Zero episodes or early episodes at the beginning of the wipe and then had plans to do more, and the funny part is every time we sat down to record, it was like, let's play one raid. Right, let's just play one raid. And then it turned into 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it's midnight. And it's like, well, we're definitely not recording at this time, and work's going to suck tomorrow. But it was fun. So that was awesome a couple months ago. And, fast forward to that time where, the middle of the wipe hits. And normally at this point, I don't really care about Kappa or Light Keeper on the PvP side. So I kind of hit the spot where I hit max traders and then kind of petered out during that mid-wipe. After a couple weeks of not really playing and digging into other titles and doing other stuff, the PvE apocalypse happened. Since then, just kind of been messing around with the PvE mode and having an absolute blast with it, which may be a controversial take, but we'll talk about it. And I actually don't think it's that controversial. I just think there's probably a bunch of different communities now that play Tarkov with this new mode activated. But I have to say it's been kind of amazing just to have kind of a casual mode to progress in and play. And it's kind of fun to think back at, learning Ground Zero and messing around with that map and all the PvP we did on that map. But yeah, things are going really well. How about you?
Boy, learning Ground Zero, that seems like so long ago. I have been enjoying PvE as well. I almost kind of consider it like we've had two wipes. It's really awkward and weird to think about because on the PvP side, we did play quite a bit at the beginning of this wipe and really enjoyed it. But then all of a sudden PvP was released and we had a couple friends that were playing single player Tarkov and they kind of talked about how fun that was. And it's been really good. I would say I got on the PvP side, got to almost to max traders. I think I'm level 38 or 39 and kind of puttered out the same thing. Kind of got to a point where I knew that the time investment to get much higher as far as pushing quests and getting into the end game, I just wasn't going to have enough time to do that. So kind of got interested in other games for a little bit. And then BSG drops this bombshell on us that they're adding a single player to the game or basically like an offline mode with progression to the game. And a couple weeks later, here we are. And I have to say, I should miss the PvP mode of the game. And the cynical side of me thinks that I should be playing the PvP side of the game a little bit more, but I really don't. I'm really excited to get in this episode and talk about why, as we talk about PvE Tarkov and kind of where it all came from. I think that as far as where I've been and how I've been playing for this wipe so far, I've just really enjoyed Tarkov in a new way. Having both played the PvP side and the PvE side so close together, those experiences have kind of been close enough together and enough playtime together where it really has highlighted some differences that have made it almost two different games. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's going to be hard to stick to our topic list that we put on this because there's so much wrapped up in this PvE mode with, from the origins to, how BSG rolled it out to what we've kind of experienced so far. But, one of the things that you said, the surprise of it, right? And we've talked a lot about this in past episodes about what we think PvE encounters or PvE additions to the game would be. And I never in a million years imagined that they would launch a completely separate, not client, but a completely separate character with separate progression. I think if somebody was, holding a gun to my head a year, 2 or 3 years ago and asked where I thought it would go, I really thought they would have gone the route of like co-op weekly missions or challenging PvE content that progressed you slightly or allowed you to get a little bit of loot or some progression on your PvP character. But never in a million years did I think that they would release a version of the game that your character doesn't wipe. You can do co-op. There's still a flea market. I agree with you about the shock factor, and the number of things that I was shocked about are almost countless. I mean, if I think truly about what this mode represents, it's a completely separate game. And that's kind of a really neat thing. As we talk about both sides of the coin, we're weeks now removed from when they rolled this out and some of the emotions that got caught up in that. And we'll do our best to capture all of the different sides of that. But it's kind of wild to think about how chaotic the start of this was to now seeing the different communities and people kind of latch on to different things.
I think BSG really thought about how to get players involved and how to get new players into Tarkov with this wipe. I mean, that's where Ground Zero came from. The idea of having a map that is really a new player experience. You level out of it at level 20, and the whole map is designed around teaching you a different environments and different types of where people play, to teaching you the basics of how you're going to encounter other players in PvP, because that's kind of what Ground Zero is. It gives you like a room to go find something. It gives you like a garage where there's things in the way that you can use as cover, but also, hide people's approaches, right? It gives you a medical tent so you can kind of see how that works. And it gives you exfils that are both covered and out in the open. It gives you a vehicle extract. And I think it was a really good concept to try to teach the game to new players. But at the same time, it seemed like they needed to do more, or it seemed like the game got to a spot where it just needed something different to attract and retain new players, because the learning curve combined with PvP just felt a little harsh.
Ground Zero was such an interesting thing, right? And it all depends on the perspective with which you approached Ground Zero. And some of the feedback from the episodes when we were breaking it down and what to do as a new player, what experienced players could possibly do with it. Like you said, there were so many things that were designed to teach new players things about Tarkov, including rooms that you walked into and just died from an explosion. And a lot of people got the Welcome to Tarkov achievement for the first time, for their first death in the game because of that. As I consider that, and then you talked about how this mode came to be, I guess I'll ask, like, why, how do you think they went from, a Ground Zero beginner map to this? And I'm thinking about it through the lens of, we had a lot of feedback on Ground Zero from the veteran player base, right? And their perspective on Ground Zero was, it was just a little bit of a speed bump, right? Whereas you and I, we like to talk about things, break it down, consider a new player to the game. So we spent a lot of time on Ground Zero, and we ended up really liking the map and what they did with it. But a lot of people that played the game a lot or had been playing for multiple wipes didn't have a really strong opinion on Ground Zero because they only spent like 2 or 3 raids going to Ground Zero before months later when they opened it up for levels 21 plus. So I'm curious how you think they managed that whole concept of getting new people to the game, dealing with a new player and how to teach them about Tarkov, and how we winded up with a PvE mode in the midst of all that.
Well, it's becoming pretty obvious that BSG is realizing they have an accessibility problem for Tarkov. And what I mean by that is that, let's say you've been playing Tarkov since early on, and let's say you've been playing most of the wipes, maybe took a wipe off here or there, but played most of the wipes. You know most of the tasks, you can play the game, you can breeze through, get the flea market, and then you're well on your way. You know what to save, because you've got it all memorized, whatever. And let's say you want to have your friends come join you. Well, Tarkov is a very inaccessible game for most people to join a very high time, high experience player, because if you're an FPS player and you're coming from PUBG or Call of Duty or whatever, you're going to log in, going to gear up with the best stuff you have, and you're going to die right away. And then you're going to lose all your stuff. It's going to be extremely punishing because this game style for Tarkov is so different, right? Tarkov is a shooter, but it's more of an MMO shooter, which is a totally different thing. And I think BSG realized that they were attracting different types of players, and that in order to keep a sticky player base, they had to do something to broaden their appeal and broaden their ability to have people have fun playing the game and want to do more. And that's where I think they started experimenting, and Ground Zero is one of those experiments. But what came out of nowhere really was the success of the mod community creating the single player Tarkov, which was, not a sanctioned mode of the game in any way. But the mod community grew to be huge, and there's tons of people playing single player Tarkov, some of them completely in silence for fear of getting banned. And we even had friends that played through the whole game in single player Tarkov and didn't mention anything. Just didn't want to talk about it in any way, really. And so I think that what ended up happening is BSG already recognized that the game needed to be more accessible somehow. The game needed a pathway, an on-ramp, whatever you want to call it. It needed a way for people to play the game and learn the game and kind of flatten out that skill level curve. And I think that that's kind of where they were started to go with Ground Zero, but then they realized that, hey, wait a minute, we need to pay attention to single player Tarkov and why people want to play it.
I mean, there's so many things that point to why they did it. And I kind of like a few of those things that you said. I hadn't thought about them before. I like the concept of a splintered player base. The new players, the veteran players, the people coming back after a couple wipes, the more casual players where, after a bunch of wipes, I'll play to the mid wipe, enjoy the beginning, and then kind of be done. And you have all these various groups, and oftentimes, they mix and people find friends to play with, or they convince their friend to finally buy Tarkov. And I think you're right. They had to have the stats on the back end to show how many people quit after just a number of hours or a number of raids, or there had to be just these massive break points where new players fell off, even veteran players fall off. For me personally, I get to a point in a wipe where I'm having a great time. I love PvP, right? And it may surprise some people to hear that I really enjoy the PvE mode. And I've played an absolute ton of it over the last few weeks for a number of reasons. And I'll dig into those reasons a little bit later in the show. But the PvE side is very interesting to me. That being said, I also love the PvP side. But there is a point where the PvP becomes very unbalanced. And if I don't have a lot of time to sink into the game, I can't really learn more about the game past what I've done so far, right? So I haven't really dug into streets. I never really did a ton of labs. I didn't know Lighthouse very well before this wipe. Digging in and trying to learn those things in the live mode when there's people that have hundreds or thousands of hours on those maps can be a brutal experience. And if you have way less playtime than that, it can be really hard to learn those quests, those maps, where the good loot is, or you have to invest a tremendous amount of time out game watching videos, listening to shows, whatever it is. I agree with you. I think that all of those problems, all of those issues, and the intermingling of those different player bases all in one mode, I think was probably leading to a bleeding player base. I mean, there was even a point where they greenlit a couple streamers to stream single player Tarkov when this PvE mode was new or about to be launched, right around the time when they announced that new version. The amount of people that were interested in it, I think, just absolutely shocked Battlestate.
And I think the reason why they were interested still it's almost like Battlestate doesn't believe it at times when they talk about what's coming in the upcoming releases for Tarkov. I do think that over time they've had to completely reverse their thinking on PvE in general as a valid game mode. The vision for the game was always to be a looter shooter, but be a milsim, right? Be something that is as realistic as possible, have a very advanced gun building system, have a very realistic PvP type system, try to make it so that the environmental factors and the guns are as real as can be, and make the game really just try to be an actual milsim type environment. And I think that they actually, in some ways, did such a good job at that. They've had trouble with others, and I'm not going to get super negative and go down the rabbit hole of inertia or anything like that. I'll just say that as they've tried different things, they have found success, and the game is pretty good in a lot of ways. They've done some kind of weird things too with armor, but whatever. They're trying to make it as real and fit their vision as possible. But I don't think that PvE ever was really in the cards for this game. As a matter of fact, years ago, I remember watching podcasts with Nikita, and he just basically said that PvE was not something that he thought was a valid game mode. I'd have to look up the direct quote, and I don't remember exactly where it was, but you can find it. I think the popularity of single-player Tarkov, like you said, I think it just shocked them. And that combined with, in the PvP mode, there's such a problem with cheaters. And of course, there's such a split in time played, so you get new players playing against level 60 players. And that led to just a player base that was just kind of bleeding off at certain points in the game. Well, now, we all have had times where we get to a certain point in the wipe, and it's like, okay, I've done this all before. I got to where I'm progressing now. And when you hit that wall of progression, it ends up being time-consuming, and you're learning while you're trying to PvP at the same time, while you're trying to do new things on maps, which you've never done at the same time. And it's just too much, really. What ends up happening is, unless you can really throw time at this game, you hit a wall where you just don't progress, and it's not fun, and you stop playing. And then people crave that early PvP wipe experience because Tarkov is a very fun game when the playing field is fair and when you have map knowledge of what's going on. And so a lot of the player base has the first 20, 25 levels of questing completely memorized at this point. And that's why the early wipe is so much fun, because you can play the game and not have to think about any of the things that make progression hard. You can play the game, you can PvP, you just do all of the different things for the early quest. It's all the same, it's very repetitive, it's simple, and it's just fun. And Tarkov's main problem is that in order to experience the full game, very few people have the amount of time and or skill and or just luck to get all the way through to the end of the quest progression. And I think that like most MMO games that are out there, the real end game where the developers have put a lot of time and a lot of effort into either closing storylines or having interesting things that you interact with in the environment, very few people get to ever see that. And BSG is starting to go through what a lot of games go through as they start to mature. And it's kind of funny to say that because this game is in perpetual beta. But as the beta matures, if you want to say it that way, BSG is starting to realize, hey, we built a lot of things that we want players to play, but they never get to. I do think the stats on how far people actually get in a wipe, there has to be a massive drop-off in the 20s, and there's a massive drop-off in the 40s, I would guess. Because once you unlock max traders, it's a grind from there. It stops being as fun. And so I think that as BSG has looked at Tarkov and tried to think, how are we going to make Tarkov appealing to a broad base of players? We want those players, whether they're PvP or PvE, to experience the game. I mean, that's ultimately why you make the game, is the developer wants you to experience the things that they've made. And the single-player Tarkov community showed them that the desire is in the player base to experience all of the game. So the desire for, the low-time player who's just a gamer dad who can maybe play once a week for an hour, the desire is there, the game design is good, and the desire is there to play the game. But there's no way that person will ever get to the end game because it's just too much. And I think that there's a lot of people like that. That's the reality of it. There's plenty of people out there who can play the game for many hours a week and, can just cruise right through. But that's not the majority of the player base in any game. And I think that where BSG has gotten is they've changed their perspective on what the ideal gamer is for their game. And so I said a lot there, so I'd love to hear what you think about that. But I just think BSG has kind of come to a more balanced opinion on PvE versus PvP. What do you think about that?
You did say a lot there, and I was kind of enjoying listening to you riff on it. There's two things that you said that I want to dig into a little bit more. You talked about how people's time affects their ability to engage and experience Tarkov and the entirety of it. The massive segment of people that took this game on in late 2019 and 2020 when the big Twitch event happened, many people, right? And we've had so many conversations about this, had unbelievably high playtime due to COVID. And Tarkov is a game that I don't think many people would have ever bought or even tried to learn if they didn't have high playtime at some point. And I think the reality of life, and you talked about gamer dads, you know, we both fit that mold, and we go through seasons of high playtime. We go through seasons of low playtime. We go through seasons of no playtime. There's also a number of other groups of people, not necessarily like dads or whatever else, but they have different interests or things that pull them away, right? There's people that are playing other games. I mean, say they're playing WoW and they have a raid team and they're committed a couple nights a week and then they have another, night or two to play something else. Tarkov doesn't work for that. So there's that aspect. And I think you're right there. We've been in this game for over 4 years now, and there's people that have been in it for like up to 6, maybe even 7, I think. There's people that probably have stepped away for a very long time and have come back, or life's changed. You get a promotion, you get married, all these things can happen, but you still love the game and you want to come back. And I resemble that. And that kind of leads into your comment about the ideal gamer, or Battlestate's view of the ideal gamer that they're targeting for Escape from Tarkov. And I think one of the most interesting things about the addition of the standalone non-progress wiping PvE mode is that they have opened up a completely new category. And in addition to just targeting the gamer that is going to enjoy that mode, I don't know that Battlestate has thought through this completely yet, but the things that people would absolutely scream and rage about on the PvP side of things as microtransactions and things like that, they could absolutely implement those on the PvE side where it's technically not affecting other people's gameplay, but they could sell things on the PvE side in a microtransaction that would never impact the PvP side. And I think they're going to start tapping into new markets, and I hope they're considering that, because the biggest reason why they're launching new things and launching new versions and trying to find new players and ways to reach out to them or to re-engage old ones and get them to upgrade their version has to be money. They have to create a renewable source of revenue, and they've now brought something, probably accidentally, if we're being completely honest, that a boatload of people are interested in for many different reasons. We've only scratched the surface on a few of them. We haven't even talked about the mode itself yet and all the differences or things like that. Seasonality of time, right? When people have time to play, the ideal gamer, or now the multiple segments of people, and then the revenue streams that are possible from this. Again, I know that in talking about revenue and different versions and microtransactions, there's a lot of people that are going to react different ways to that, right? Because when the version first rolled out that had PvE, it was $100 over and above the Edge of Darkness edition. They ended up reducing that down to $50 more, and now they're talking about offering a standalone PvE. So they did a lot of knee-jerk reactions to the response from the community, but the net of it is that they're trying to figure out what they can charge for cool new features, or if they can charge for it and where to make money. And frankly, with the popularity of it, I'm hopeful that they find some revenue models that the community agrees with and will support, because I think they've stumbled onto, and this is the first time I've said it, I'll say it a few more times, but I think they've stumbled onto the best single player or co-op FPS experience, at least that I've ever played. I mean, it is an unreal amount of fun, and I can't even imagine how cool it would be to pick up Tarkov for the first time, load the PvE mode, and start working through the quests for the first time and dealing with the challenge and dealing with the healing and dealing with the armor and figuring out like how to not get killed by sniper scabs. And these PMCs are lasering me from all over the place. Like, this game is so deep and challenging, even without other players shooting at you and ruining your day, that I think they've developed one of, if not the best, single-player FPS experience ever made on the PvE side. You said a lot, I said a lot. I think the amalgam of all that is there are so many reasons why Battlestate should have done this. We're never going to know what the actual reasons are for them launching this because of the way they launched it and the versioning and how they weren't going to give it to EOD at first and all of these other things. I think it's pretty safe to say that they accidentally backed into something that might end up being the best thing that ever happened to Escape from Tarkov.
Do you think that this mode has attracted a totally new player?
I think it has the opportunity to, and I think the funny part about press or bad press is that news, I mean, that was global news. It was picked up by a lot of national syndicates and I think around the world because of the overall situation of the negativity around that mode launching. I think the result of that bad press is a lot of people learned that Battlestate was launching a PvE mode. And at the time it was very expensive. And over time they're going to learn that there's probably going to be a standalone version of it or, whatever it is. I think that whether they already have or will, they've at least opened up a new lane to a completely different player. I would imagine that they've found a ton of them just through this entire uproar. People that were interested in the game or had heard about it, but weren't necessarily interested in PvP or weren't necessarily interested in a seasonal game where their progress wiped. Those two factors alone, removing those, I think does allow for an entirely new player base to join and come to the game.
They've also talked about how they're going to allow mods, which really blows my mind, actually, because that's another piece that they absolutely did not want to have part of the game, right? They never wanted to have mods in the game. And single-player Tarkov showed that there's so many things that can be done to the game through the mod community that just make the game more fun for different groups of players. It doesn't hurt anything. It's basically offline progression with your friends, and you can play the game in any way you want to. And if you want to get online and play the competitive PvP mode against other people, you can do that too. And so I think mods are going to be very interesting to watch. I'm not sure how much they'll actually catch on or not in the short term, but I think long term, the way that BSG approaches mods is going to be very, very important. Because if you think about other MMOs, they have add-ons, and you've got add-on managers like Curse and Overwolf and those kinds of things that just help the mod community do a couple of things, not only earn money for investing into the game itself, but then also the add-on itself can be managed. So the version of the add-on is consistent and the mod works the right way and all those things. And, how does matchmaking work when you have mods installed? It's almost in my mind to kind of get back to my original question. Do I think that this is a different player base? I wonder if it's a different kind of player completely, or if it's just a new player that says, hey, this is a looter shooter that supports mods, and this looks interesting to me, and I can play it with my friends, and we don't lose our progress. Versus, I'm really into PvP, played the game long enough, and we got far enough where now it's boring. Let's restart it because everyone's on an equal playing field, and I really like that first part. So they like the wipe concept. I just wonder if it's just two different groups, and BSG might have stumbled into creating two different player bases for like the same game that don't actually have to interact with each other for both player bases to have fun, which I just think is really interesting.
I'm going to say that I think that's really interesting about not having the communities have to interact if they don't want to. I want to go back to the mod support for a second, because a lot of what the PvE mode does for the player that doesn't have a lot of time, it's very simply a quality of life improvement, right? You hear quality of life improvements all over the place for patches, and a lot of games do, people are like, where are the quality of life improvements this patch? The PvE mode for, lower playtime players or people that don't want to do as much PvP comes with a lot of quality of life things and very interesting decisions, like allowing it to be an open flea market with an economy, even though you're not playing with playing against other players. You can co-op with them if you want, but the economy is still there. So the idea of mod support, to me, one of the biggest things that mod creators do and is very prevalent in single player Tarkov is quality of life mods. Things like if you loot a key, it'll tell you if you already have that key or not. Things like being able to see your teammate's name above their character, not being able to shoot your teammate, but you could blow them up, right? And the other thing that the mods will allow, if Battlestate can find a way to support it in a way that allows true experimentation to happen, when other titles hit the market, when other looter shooters hit the market, it's going to allow modders and Battlestate to test those features or quality of life changes much more easily and see if it belongs in the game. I think that fact alone will also cause players to come together more often versus completely separating. There may be a mod that comes out that gains such popularity that it brings people that love PvE and PvP back into it to test it out, to try it. While I think there's a ton of value for Battlestate to separate player lanes or groups of players and let them enjoy their own experience or experience fighting other players, I think mods are a way that you could see where we could end up seeing a lot of players coming back together to play a modified game mode of some kind.
To add to that thought, which is a good one, mods in some people's mind represent a threat to like the purity of the game. I can understand that and appreciate that opinion and kind of that thought track. I think Tarkov has an interesting opportunity because with mods, you don't necessarily have to use them. And that's one thing like for everybody, like mods are optional. Now, some mods are not optional in the end because it makes the gameplay experience so much better that, hey, you got to be running this mod or you really are setting yourself behind. But at the same time, there's no sense of urgency because there's no wiping in PvE. And so as we kind of explore this mod concept, there is a group of people out there that are going to say like the mods make the purity of the game go down. And I think that as we explore PvE in general as a mode, there's going to be an entirely new set of like thought around it because PvE mode, offline co-op mode with your friends, with, like you said, with an active flea market that's still across all these accounts is just a totally different game. I'll wrap up my thought on PvE and mods by just saying I think Battlestate has stumbled into an entirely new game, and that game is super fun. And whatever direction they take it, I'm just excited that they decided to embrace a new player base.
All right, everybody. So if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. We do want to talk about our experience in playing PvE specifically. But before we do that, I just wanted to say thanks to everybody. If you're enjoying the show, if you've always enjoyed the show, the best thing you can do to support us is leaving a like, leaving a thumbs up, putting a comment on whatever platform you listen to. And if you can, leave a 5-star review. Those go a long way to people finding the show. Whatever you do, whatever you can do to help, we always appreciate it. Just wanted to take a moment to say thanks. So I think we would be doing a disservice if we didn't at least talk a little more in depth about the rollout. We've kind of touched on a couple of the things that happened, but we like to think about development decisions a lot, or what the company was thinking, and you've heard some of our opinions on it, but I'll throw this one back in your court. What do you think, or what do you want to talk about with how Battlestate rolled this out?
Well, I think there was a lot of controversy around the idea that the Edge of Darkness edition was going to have DLC forever, right? Anything new was going to be included in Edge of Darkness, and that's a great concept. And Battlestate started to split hairs on what DLC actually means, which I think was just a mistake. You don't start fighting the definition of something with the player base. I wish they would have come out and just said, look, here's the deal. We want to make PvE mode a thing, and we can't realistically afford to make this just free forever for Edge of Darkness. We appreciate the support that everyone is given the game, and we appreciate the confidence and the support of just, hey, paying the extra money for Edge of Darkness in anticipation of extra features in the future. And I wish they would have handled it better. I really don't think they did a good job. They had an opportunity to, instead of make this a totally negative explosion about not being transparent about what DLC is and all this other stuff, they could have been more honest and just said, like, the game needs funding. This is a funding mechanism. You don't have to do this. but we want to incorporate a PvE version. They could have done that better, and I think we should acknowledge that. I mean, as a veteran players for the game at this point, we're mostly positive about Tarkov because we recognize the good and the potential of the game, but I think it's also realistic to recognize that they made some mistakes in the way they rolled this out. It's not to say that it was totally all wrong, but they initially made some mistakes before they started to recognize that, okay, we need to offer PvE to more than just the Unheard Edition or this top level upgrade and combine some other things and get to a better spot over time. But again, I'm going to relate it back to completely that PvE was never part of their long-term game design until a couple of months ago when single-player Tarkov turned into something that they had no idea there was such a demand for. And a lot of their rollout of this feature in the Unheard Edition and the Stash expansion, all of this stuff was just reaction. And it really felt like it just was uncoordinated reaction to me. And I think that that's kind of how we got to this point where they just like, we need to do something. We have an opportunity here to add more features to the game. They didn't really know what to do, and they kind of flailed along a little bit. And so instead of having a well thought out plan or having this be on the roadmap, like a normal game, like have this be on the roadmap for the game, I don't feel like this ever was. And it was just an interruption in what they had planned. And the reaction just didn't go as well as it could have. And that's my thoughts on it. What do you think?
I like trying to look through their lens. I think it's a pretty gross understatement to say that they didn't handle it well, but we're not trying to kick a dead horse here. That was spewed all over the internet, all over Twitter, all over Reddit. Like, there's articles written about it at this point. There's massive streamers that don't play FPS games that were breaking down the decision to do this or how they did it. But one of the things, as I consider it through their lens, I think surprise is the right term. And I think they are incredibly surprised at how many people like, want, and desired the PvE mode. And the reason I say that is when you consider that through the lens of Battlestate, and when you think about this new mode that they launched and originally charging $100 for it, if they weren't expecting it to be as big as it was, then the additional cost of it doesn't really matter if they didn't think people would care about it, right? So being $100 more than EOD, if they truly didn't realize how big this was going to be, then they probably weren't thinking a lot about how to roll out the price and how to roll out the structure of it. I just think that they had to knee jerk to that. Furthermore, I think that they didn't have the servers ready, right? They had no idea that so many people would want this. And initially, they may have even thought that people were just mad that they weren't getting the thing because they had EOD and they should get all DLC. And again, that surprise factor, I think, points to them really not knowing how many people actually wanted to play the PvE mode because they were having rollout issues, they were having server infrastructure problems. They've gone through days and patch periods where wait times were 10 to 20 minutes. Right. And so now they're having to backtrack and do all this matching. So I think surprise through the lens of Battlestate also can somewhat explain their poor rollout of the Unheard Edition and how it was attached. Because, 2020 hindsight, it's like, well, if they recognized how popular this was going to be, they wouldn't want to gate it behind another edition and make it so expensive. Look, the $100 price tag over and above EOD, had they released that or $50 to $100 as a standalone offering, they probably would have still had some outrage, still had some outcry, but they could have quickly modified the price to that edition. But that would have actually given them the opportunity to hit that player base that we were talking about earlier and hit them from day one instead of hoping that they find it down the road now. A lot of people have said, and I kind of agreed with this sentiment when I read it, if they would have released PvE as a standalone for like $25, $30, it probably would have been one of the top sellers, if not the top seller in 2024. I think they would have found an entirely new market and made way more money than they did with the Unheard Edition. That being said, there's a lot of blue names when you look in who's playing the PvP version and when you're watching streams and stuff, you see a lot of blue names. So I think the Unheard Edition probably did pretty well. again, I don't know that there's anyone out there that would argue that they rolled it out the best way possible.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more quality of life stuff come from Battlestate. Battlestate's going to get pressure from other looter shooter games as they've watched Battlestate be the first ones to plow the road, as it were, and show what works and what doesn't work. And BSG is going to get a lot of pressure on Tarkov to add more quality of life additions or quality of life things that can be bought as expansions, is what they would call them, to the game. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I'll just say that I think the rollout was a complete surprise to them. It was a reaction to that surprise, and it wasn't handled great. And we don't generally like to get super negative and just dwell on that. But Trigger's right. There was plenty of people who had never really played Tarkov a lot, but still, in the gaming world, this was a massive story. And it's kind of a case study on how not to do this, actually.
No doubt.
But I would just say, I think they've recovered fairly well. We're at a point now where it's died down. The gameplay in PvE is getting better as they're opening up more and more servers. And soon, with the next major patch to the game, the server experience for solo gameplay in PvE is going to be running locally on your computer, which is going to make the queue times nothing because you're running it yourself. And they're only going to use PvE servers for co-op, which should greatly enhance playing with your friends, doing offline co-op. It should really cut down on those server queue times. So I think they've done a good job recognizing that that's an addition. I'm sure that's going to come with some concern over cheating. But again, when you're playing with yourself, you're really only cheating as far as yourself goes. And then they're going to say, well, that's going to affect the flea market and yada, yada, yada. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm sure people will have plenty of negativity towards it. But I do think it's a good step for just quality of life and for just playing solo PvE, which I have a feeling is a lot of it. Most of the PvE is solo progression with people playing, and I just think that it's going to be a good change for there. So all that being said, we wanted to make sure we touched on the rollout because that is, well, it was a very major part of this, and it was a very major story in the entire gaming world, and it was something we definitely needed to cover. But I think to wrap this up tonight, we'll talk a little bit about our experience in PvE so far, kind of what we like about it and our takeaways from it. So, Trigger, how's it been going for you? What do you like best about it?
That's a hard thing to point to just one thing. You kind of heard my opinion earlier about it being one of, if not the best single player FPS experiences out there, or it's at least in the conversation or will be. But I think the thing that I really have enjoyed, and it started when I got into like the late 20s or early 30s on the PvE side and started doing things like I got a labs card and decided to go to labs, right? And in the PvP wipes and all of them prior, I've played some labs. I know a little bit about it. I know, some of the hot spots and why people go there, but I never really knew the loot locations. I never really knew where people spawned, what exactly they were going for. And when I really realized I was enjoying PvE was when I ended up just playing back-to-back labs for, I probably did 25 or 30 raids over the course of a week and a half. And I learned basically everything there is to know about the labs, cards, what the rooms hold, where the loose loot is, and how to target certain items, how to get the hideout upgrade items for the intelligence center and for solar. There's a lot of people that have completed those things on the PvP side or ran enough labs where they knew it really well. And that's just not something I really engaged in because I just didn't really have the time to sink hundreds and hundreds of raids into learning labs. While it was very cheater infested, while high playtime players, there's people that only do labs. Once they can do labs, it's all they do. So learning the map, learning where to go, and not just watching a video, but like learning the mechanics of jumping through the glass or where to shoot glass and get through it, or where you can jump over a railing if you need to escape, and all these things. It's really hard to figure those out when you have really good players that know everything there is to know about the map playing against you. So I spent all this time on labs and I learned, where all the rare spawns were, like how to spawn raiders, how to farm raiders, what sort of triggers cause them to move around the map or spawn in different locations. And the result of that is I am now incredibly comfortable on labs using the key cards, knowing, how the stairwells work. And if I'm by green, that I can go right down that stairwell to black. And I now know how to flank and get around to different spots. So for me, I played a lot of FPS, I played a lot of MMOs, and I love PvP. The interesting part is that doesn't mean I hate PvE, but I am absolutely in love with learning maps, learning where things are. And I've actually now spent a lot of time on the PvP side since learning labs on the PvE side. And now I'm learning the PvP on the map. But because of my work on the PvE side, I've been able to pull great value out of labs when I've had good raids or I win a bunch of fights. And then I can go loot black or loot green or go check some LEDX spawns or Bitcoin spawns, things like that. And that confidence gained from the PvE side has led to me having a very positive experience on the PvP side of labs. That same concept, and labs is a relatively small map, but there's a ton to learn about it. There's a ton of loot spawns to learn. They don't always spawn, so you got to learn how to check them and, where things can like spawn in a bookshelf and you can't quite see it. But I've taken that same concept on multiple maps in PvE, streets being a big one where I've learned a ton about streets and I now really enjoy the map, and I see why a lot of players really gravitate towards streets near the end of the wipe, which I normally kind of quit playing by that point. But I've learned more about interchange, I've learned more about customs, I've learned more about woods. I actually know how to find Prapper's stupid convoy on woods now without getting horribly lost. Even though that's been out for a long time, it's the quest I hate the most in this game because of how many times I ran into the goons or got turned around or shot by a sniper. I hate that quest. Now I know the markers and how to get it because I didn't have other players forcing my actions in PvE, which allowed me to truly learn the maps while there was progression activated. And for me, having progression matters. And I did some offline raids in PvP mode to learn certain things over the years, but I just didn't enjoy not progressing while learning. So just having that progression in a different mode has helped me learn probably more about different maps in Tarkov in the last 3 or 4 weeks than I had in the previous 2 years. And it has been unbelievably enjoyable for just that one fact. And I have a lot of other things that I love about this mode, but that's been the most important one to me, and it's made me enjoy this mode so much, learning where the spawns are, what loot is where, and then I can apply that to PvP knowledge I have on why I run into people where I run into, and now I want to figure out how to beat them so that I can go get that loot because I know it actually spawns there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I'll go a couple things. Like you, there's things that are part of the game that I was unable to participate in, either because of time or because of level and not really getting there, or because learning while PvPing, you kind of have to do one or the other, and you run out of time and you either die or you need to extract and start over again. Tarkov is such a dynamic and deep game when it comes to all the features and items and trades and the way that the hideout system adds complexity to it and the loot and so many different things going on in each map that in order to fully appreciate it, you got to have an opportunity to learn the nuance of the different maps. And Labs is a perfect example. For me, I would say that I've spent a lot of time going slower through the PvE experience. And I spent a ton of time on Interchange so far, a ton more time on Shoreline. I've just have gone from being, I would say, a casual to pretty good with those maps to being completely an expert at them and totally comfortable with the dynamics of the map. And I don't feel any urgency or any pressure to do anything different. I'm leveling at my own pace. I know it's not going to get reset. So if it takes me a long time, relatively speaking, to the way that I've played the PvP mode to get to the end of the game, that's fine. Every game has an endpoint. Every game has a spot where it's going to be over, a point where you beat the game. You expect that. And eventually, I will get to that point in PvE. But until then, I don't feel the sense of urgency to fly through it. I'm actually enjoying the journey of playing the game. And to me, that's an entirely different game, an entirely different experience than the PvP side of Tarkov that's seasonal. And I really appreciate that. I also think that if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't understand PvE, I don't know why I would just want to run around and fight a couple of bots or raiders, like that sounds like no fun to me. This is a waste of time. Why did BSG do this to my game? I'm going to give you a thought here, kind of as we close this out. I think PvP players who really want good PvP are going to appreciate the fact that this mode exists and maybe a wipe or maybe two. Because players that spend that time working through PvE are going to come back to PvP as well to have fun with it, and they're going to be quite a bit better. And that PvP quality is going to get just, out of this world. And for PvP players who really enjoy a good fight and aren't looking for just, I'm going to dumpster on new players and whatever, because that is great. It's good to always win, but after a while that gets boring. And good PvP players, like you, Trigger, have said on many episodes, you really crave a PvP fight where skill level is roughly comparable and it just comes down to just making good decisions and having fun in the moment and all of that. And the general player base, I think, is going to collapse as far as skill level because PvE exists over time. And that's going to bring up the quality of PvP for everybody. Today, low time players are going to have a better experience as they get better and get more familiar and comfortable with the game. And high time players are going to find better fights because the player base in general will be much more equal in ability and skill. And I just think it's a win for everybody. And I leave that as a perspective. If you've made it this far in the episode and you're like, I'm never going to fight bots. I don't know anybody likes this. This is dumb. I'd leave this with a perspective for you to think about it from that perspective. And hopefully you realize that there's, value in all the different ways that we can play this game.
I actually completely agree with you as somebody who is a PvP player. And I also, again, I enjoy MMOs, and I know there's people that are more pure FPS players than I am, but I am a PvP junkie. And one of the things that has really kept me engaged on the PvE side is the market competition on the flea market, right? So just that little bit of competition. Oh, it's just great. I think we're going to experience the higher quality PvP at the beginning of the next wipe. Right, it's the beginning of June right now. If the next wipe is 2 months away, if it's in August some point, I think there's a lot of players who are going to gain a ton of knowledge about this game during that time. I'm one of them. I've already learned more, like I already put it out there. I learned more in the last 4 weeks about Tarkov than I had learned over the last 2 years. I've learned a lot about PvP and how to fight other players, but that was prohibiting me from learning certain things about the game because those actions made me do different things on the maps or not experience or want to do certain quests. Now I'm getting those quests done and learning a lot. I think the beginning of the next wipe is going to be a fascinating experience as a lot of players re-engage with the PvP wipe who typically do, who are waiting for it because they've just been, fighting chads at the end of the PvP wipe on that side. As the PvE crowd re-enters the next wipe, I think it could be an unbelievable amount of players, number one, but I also agree that the quality of PvP is going to be on a different level, and it's going to create unique challenges because of that. There's not going to be a whole lot of Timmies running around not knowing where to go either, right? So when you're sprinting for that key spawn location because you know that you need to, pull a key out of it to get the golden Zibbo or whatever else, a lot of people that know where that is now. And so they may have never gotten there first during the PvP mode, but PvE taught them where that is. So I think there's going to be a shift in where PvP happens, and there's going to be a shift in the quality. And I think it's going to happen much faster than most people expect. I think it'll be the beginning of the next wipe. And then I do agree with you that over time, I think that gap in skill for the majority of the player base is going to get closer together. It's going to really spawn some new play styles and areas of interest on the maps because, like I said, people are going to know the POIs a lot better. So great point. I agree. I have a slightly different take on it, but I am excited to see where this takes the game.
I am too. And it's been a lot of fun to play this early piece of just PvE content that's being out there. And I'm looking forward to see where Battlestate takes it, because every wipe we're going to get some new PvP thing plus some new PvE thing. You know, where those are different, it'll be interesting. And where they overlap, it's going to be interesting as well. So I think that's about it for this episode. We want to thank everyone for sticking in there and listening to the end here with us. We're moments away from disappearing because we're seeing that green bar flash above us. But we'd love if you joined us in Discord. Come talk about the game. Tell us what you think about PvE. Tell us what you think about PvP. Come talk about what you think about the way that Battlestate rolled out this new Unheard Edition. So join the Exfil community on Discord, and there's lots of people in there who are, you know, coming back to the game after taking a break. We still got people that play and have found their community for playing Tarkov there, which is really cool because that's why we did this in the first place. And remember, you can find the show on a variety of platforms. It's on YouTube. It's on your favorite podcasting app. Just search for the Exfil podcast and be good to go. But that's about it. Good luck in your raids, and we'll see you next time.
See you, everybody. Thanks.